Hello all my JavaScript friends, this is the Virtuoid, aka Mike Smith, and this is Fun with JavaScript, our racing game. Where we last left off, we were trying to fix up some really minor bugs. Well, actually it ended up not being very minor, but some bugs within the track system. But I thought I'd go ahead and let's show you what the changes we've made within the cars, within the tracks itself, and then we'll finally, with the last video, show you how everything is put together and what our next steps will be. So this video is going to concentrate on the changes we made to the car. Now, with the car itself, earlier our CarBase.JavaScript had absolutely everything inside of it, but now what I have done is I've split everything into different pieces, and I call those different pieces parts. So let's go back to our let's go back to our browser real quick and show you what those different parts are. Basically, we have the wheels, which are highly obvious. We have the transmission, which, see if I can get a good view of it here. I kind of left it visible. That's the transmission right there. It basically connects the four wheels together into the hinge joints, which allows them to rotate independently of each other while all staying together within this little square that we have. And finally, we have the body. Now, earlier within the car base, we had actually a fourth piece called the chassis. We had the wheelbase, and we had the chassis, and we had the body. I got rid of the chassis completely, and I renamed the wheelbase to called transmission, which is basically what it is. So I've gotten the car down now from 4 distinct parts down to 3, and this seems to work the best. Again, the wheels, the transmission, and the body itself. So let's take a look at that. Well, everything is basically a part. I realized that all the different pieces had similar data, and when you have similar data, you want to try to put that into a base class, and then we extend this base class into all the different parts. And so this is very simple. I've got the height, the depth, the width, the mass, whether it has a zero mass or not, friction, restitution, and blah blah blah, and all those kind of things. And it has a junk routine, which basically wipes everything out. So that is really all there is to the parts. So all the rest of the other parts, the transmission, the wheels, and the body, are extended from this part. So let's take a look at the wheel first. Very, very simple here. The wheel itself, I've given it some particular defaults, in which case, I want default diameter to be that, the mass, the friction, restitution. This allows me to kind of play around with it one step at a time. These are particular pieces of data that are specific to a wheel. So although we do extend the part, we are putting extra data here with the wheel, and we throw that extra data here in the constructor. Yeah, no big deal here. And then we do the gets to get the information. The key here is that each one of these pieces need to be able to have basically 2 separate pieces of methods. And the first method is the build method and the apply physics method. If we go back to our part itself here, you can see them right here. Actually, we'll also have an add model here, which will come within the body a little bit later on. But we have a build, which just does return this, an add model, which does return this, and apply physics, which does return this. Now, you can almost think of this as basically almost an abstract model. Basically, with part, we're saying that, hey, if you're going to do a part, you need to have some sort of build method, you need to have some sort of add model method, you need to have some sort of apply physics method, if it applies to that particular part. For wheel, the only thing we're looking at is the build and the apply physics. So we're going to have to put in our build, which basically says this is how we're going to build a particular wheel, and this is how we're going to apply the physics. And this will be used in CarBase a little bit later on to put everything together to give myself a car. Each of the builds is basically in 2 separate sections. The first section is a part where we do the actual mesh itself. In this case, we're creating a sphere with a diameter, a diameter x of a diameter, regular diameter z of regular diameter, but a diameter y divided by 2, and that gives us that squishy shape. If you notice on the wheel here, it's kind of, you can see it. I don't know how you try to figure. There, good sight there. You can see that the x and the y, the x and the z are all the same diameters, but the y is squished in just a little bit, and so that kind of gives you the wheel shape there. And this is I tried capsules, not capsules, excuse me. I tried cylinders, I tried circles, things like that, and this is what I found out works the best for a wheel. So if we go back here, that basically builds that, but the second part for the build is to, in this particular case, is to give us some sort of texture. And then when we apply the physics to the actual mesh itself. We save the mesh there, and then we apply the mesh on the physics. So no big deal there. That's real simple. The transmission is pretty much the exact same way. In fact, it's even smaller. We just simply build a box. I'm not adding any kind of mesh or anything to it. I'm just having just a simple little box there, because eventually the idea here is for it to be disappeared and not there. Although in reality, once it flips over and I see it there, I notice that, hey, the car is flipped over. So I kind of like having it actually visible. But no big deal there. Is just we build it with the create box here, and we apply the physics. No big deal here. Here are the defaults. Oh, and one thing I wanted to show you, I meant to show you on the wheel, is that on the transmission, I have my defaults here. And anything I want to pass into the transmission from the calling program, I'm actually calling the part with both my defaults and the arguments. And what will happen inside part, we go back to the constructor here, is that I will merge these two together using just a simple spread operator for both the defaults and the operator, kind of a shortcut here method to do a shallow copy of these two pieces of data. So I start with the defaults and the args, and if there's the same argument or the same property within defaults and within args, args will take precedence over defaults, since that's a little bit further down here on the list. So if I was to call transmission with a new depth, it will replace, when it gets the part, it will replace the default depth I have here, or the default mass or default friction or whatever in that particular case. And the wheel does the same thing. I meant to show you that. I forgot to show you that in the wheel. So this is the transmission, real simple here. Then let's get to the body. A little bit more complicated on the body itself. Again, the same type of deal here. I got the constructor. We're just adding a color and a model. I got a build here, and the build is adding a return model. And I'm doing that because within the basic car, it's just a square and nothing else. In fact, you can see the basic car here. You can see it's just a square or a box and absolutely nothing else. But when I get to the point where I'm going to need to add the models, like for the LowPolyCar, which I'll show you here in a second, or the Ferrari or something like that, then I'm going to need to have a routine that will allow me to build the model out. And that's what add model is all about. For the simple box here, it's very simple. I'm just creating a box and absolutely nothing else. I mean, that's it, just doing that. And I'm applying the physics for the box and structure. So this is the basic body. And that's what you see here. Once we get to the LowPolyCar and to the Ferrari, which I'll show you here in just a minute, you'll see how this ties in and why we did that build model. Now, okay. All right, so that gets the body. So that makes the CarBase just a little bit easier. It's still a pretty big little operation here, but it makes it a little bit easier to work with. The constructor, one thing I want to show you here is it does have a static method called load, and this is where we're going to load the models. Again, we'll show you that with the LowPolyCar model and with the Ferrari. So when we build our CarBase, we build our constructor. I want to show you something very important here. I am passing a property here called body factory, and I'm equaling it to the body class, and I'm importing that way at the very top here somewhere. There it is, right? Whoop, yeah, there's right there. I'm importing body from body, and I'm saying that the default body factory is body, and that's going to become important. Is that when we create the LowPolyCar or when we create the Ferrari, what we're going to do is we're going to pass in a factory. Or what we call a factory here. So CarBase is basically saying, okay, I'm going to do all this. I'm going to set a color. I'm going to set a slot, a type, a telemetry mesh, all that kind of fun stuff. All the stuff we had gone through before in the earlier car video. But the idea here is now when I create it, I don't know what I'm creating. Am I creating a CarBase? Am I creating a LowPolyCar? I'm creating a Ferrari? What am I creating? So by passing what we call a body factory here, we're basically telling the constructor, our CarBase here, okay, when you get to create the body, I want you to use this routine instead of using something that you've defined yourself. And we'll see that here in just a minute here. By default, I'm constructing a normal, simple little body. So the build is exactly the same as we had before. We're building the transmission first, and it's with the add transmission. Then we're building all the wheels. Then we're building the body, and then we're setting the physics. And all these are exactly the same as we had before. Get body, get height, get all that's exactly the same, no big deal here. So now add transmission is a heck of a lot smaller than it was before. We're just calling new transmission and returning the build method. When we add the wheel, we're calling a new wheel and returning the wheel build. When we add the body, we're calling the new body factory and then returning body build. So it's going to be very important that when we get to everything here, when we create the bodies of the cars, that we always have a build method. So as you can see here, the CarBase has absolutely no clue what we're building. Whether it's 1,000 different models or just a simple CarBase, it doesn't know. By default, it's the CarBase, and so all it knows is you should have a build method on the body. I don't care what you pass me, but you've got to have a build method. If you don't, you're going to crash. And then finally, we got the set physics here, which is very, very simple. Again, exactly the same as we had before. So I can tell here now the CarBase is a lot smaller because now we have taken everything out into the different parts. All the different bodies go to the different parts. So that when we get into the program to construct a car, then it's real simple. Let's take a quick look at that. Okay, so here is my testcar.javascript, and this is the JavaScript file that is loaded up by testcar.html to be able to give us this nice, pretty little display here. Which the only thing I've added here to what we had before is I got the ability to turn on and off the boundaries, the boundary thingies. What I can't remember what they're called. I got a way to turn on and off the boundary markers, and to be able to turn on and off the visual of all the different meshes there. And I got the ability to select all the different cars that I'm currently working with. And that's the only change that I've made to this particular method here. But let's take a look at the testcar.js to show you how it loads up all these cars. Now again, it also uses a factory because basically from the test car here, the idea is that we're going to want to be able to select a car like LowPolyCar here and see the actual car come into existence. So from our particular point of view here, we want to be able to have a generic factory or a generic method to be able to say, hey, once you select the car here, I need you to change out the cars. So let's go back to the CarBase here and show you what we have. All of that magic is done in just a few lines of code here called load car. So I'm doing the load car here, line 64. You can see load car selector.value and name. And name is test card. That actually doesn't really matter. What matters is the selector.value, and by default it is that LowPolyCar. And if you happen to change that, where is it there? If you happen to change that, again, we'll do another load car here, done at 169. If you happen to change the little pull down box, and that's not important right now. Let's take a look at the actual code. So load car is going to be an async function, and the reason we're doing that is that we're going to have to do a dynamic import of the JavaScript files as they come in, and all that is right here. First thing we're going to do here is we're going to get the model name, and that model name is coming in from the value within that pull down box, and we're going to build a dynamic pointer to that model name. So that model name, if you look on the left hand side here, that model name is either going to be Ferrari.js, LowPolyCar.js, or where is it? I lost. There it is, CarBase.js, because the default here is going to be CarBase.js if there is no model name. Then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a await import, and this is a dynamic import into JavaScript. So I'm sitting here and I'm just going to stop the program at line 78 and do an await. Now, in reality, I probably just need to do it, doing simple promises and things like that. I did this in a synchronous manner here for convenience sake. Quite honestly, I don't like using awaits that much, and this is just me. I rather have everything as async as possible. This kind of turns an async into a sync, so that's neither here nor there. I did this just for simplicity purposes. But the key here is it's going to load into default, because all these JavaScript files will have a default, and it's going to reassign that to what I'm calling CarFactory. So now I'm going to do a CarFactory load, and that CarFactory load is, if you go back over to CarBase, assuming I can now find it in here, there it is. It has a static load inside there. And in this particular case, I'm just resolving null because I have no models to load in. It is at this point that we're going to go out there and get the GLB files, which you can see on the left-hand side here. There's a Ferrari.glb, a LowPolyCar.glb. This is where we'll get the GLB files to be able to have Babylon load them in and get our actual models. For the CarBase, we don't have anything, so that's just a static it has a static load of, or it just returns null. I mean, it didn't do anything. So if we get back to our, where is it? I lost it. There it is. There it is, testcar.js. If we get back to that, our model now has loaded up our screen, has now loaded up our particular model. Then I'm going to build a mesh list. That's the mesh list on the left-hand side. Here's the key thing. I'm now going to say a new CarFactory. I have assigned CarFactory to the default of what I'm importing in. So if I'm going to do a new CarFactory, what I'm actually doing is I might do a new CarBase, or I might do a new Ferrari, or I might do a new LowPolyCar. All of that is because here I'm reassigning the default of all of our dynamic imports to the variable CarFactory. This allows me to have one line here to return a new car, whether that car is CarBase, LowPolyCar, or Ferrari. And then we build it, and that's it. So from TestCar's point of view, it doesn't know the difference whether we have a CarBase or a Ferrari or a LowPolyCar. It just says, I've got a car here. Let me build this car from this factory, and then display it up on the screen. So this is a good point to show you now how the Ferraris and the LowPolyCars work into this. Let's go to LowPolyCar. So the big thing here with LowPolyCar, ignore all the comments here. This is where I was working with different things here. Here's the key with LowPolyCar. It's going to be very, very important, is that first of all, there's going to be two classes defined within each of these JavaScript files. One is going to extend the body. And the reason we're going to extend the body is that we're going to be doing something different with the body. If we go back to the body, you'll notice that we have a build argument, an add model argument, and an apply physics argument. We're going to actually redo that and extend that for each of the models that we bring in, the LowPolyCar and the Ferrari. And the reason we do that is that each one is going to be different. So it's very easy to do a box, but it's much harder to do a model. So let's take a look at the LowPolyCar model. So we're extending the body. What are we extending? Well, we're changing the add model and the apply physics. Those are going to be extraordinarily important. And the reason that we're going to have that, and the reason it's going to be extraordinarily important, is that we've got to be able to change the model for each one of these JavaScript files for the LowPolyCar and for the Ferrari, and we've got to be able to apply different types of physics. So what the Polycar is doing is that it's basically saying, okay, I've got my new model. My model is already loaded in the mesh, and I'll show you that here in just a second. I'm positioning it the way I want to position it. Then I'm going to actually physically add the model to the model, and that's where I've got this right up here. And I've done this because I was messing around with I was messing around with the different physics capabilities, whether I use capsules or boxes or things like that. So I was just kind of messing around with the LowPolyCars, and I finally figured out what worked the best. So this particular add model adds the physics to, or adds the what we call the collider mesh to the object itself. And a collider mesh basically says that, okay, I've got this model here. It's going to be different from the wheels. So we're going to basically build a collider mesh that you can't see, so that when the car gets to a certain spot, it's going to collide with the box and stop. In this case, we're using a collider box. And when we take a look at the LowPolyCar, I'll show you exactly what I mean here. We'll turn this to true, and I'll show you what I mean. So we're going to do that. We've got the apply physics, in which we apply the physics, first of all, to our mesh, which is now a custom imposter, and we're going to apply physics to our particular collider mesh up here. So for a lot of models, there's going to be two different physics. There's going to be the physics of the model itself and the physics of the collider mesh. And that's basically what I'm doing here. So LowPolyCar is basically having a collider mesh, which is a simple box, and I'm applying that physics. So the add model adds our model itself, and then adds the collider mesh, and then I apply the physics for both the model and the collider mesh. And then here's the LowPolyCar. Here's the LowPolyCar default that we're bringing in. So remember, when we were back on TestCar, when we do the dynamic import, we're reassigning default to CarFactory. So each one of these, by definition, have got to have a default export. In this case, the default export is LowPolyCar. And here, it's the same as we've had before there. I'm setting the color, I'm setting telemetry mesh, and I'm doing a scaling and all that kind of fun stuff. The key here is also the static load. I'm redefining the static load, so I will import the lowpolycar.glb file. So that's exactly, that's basically now how the Ferraris and the LowPolyCars work. Let's just go through the Ferrari real quick, just because that's going to be a little bit simpler. first of all, we want to do is take a look at the load, and the load is basically loading in the Ferrari GLB file. No biggie there. The constructor here is I'm setting up the albedo color and the telemetry mesh. I'm not doing scaling like I did on the LowPolyCar. The one thing I forgot to tell you, the LowPolyCar on the constructor here, is that remember that one of the key things here in CarBase, we go to CarBase, is I'm passing a body factory that I'm defaulting to body. And remember I said body factory is basically what I'm putting in there to say, okay, when you're constructing the body, I want you to use this class or this class, or this class. And by default, I'm using the simple body class. But in the LowPolyCar here, I'm setting it to LowPolyCar body, which I defined up here. Same thing with the Ferrari. On the Ferrari here, I'm setting body factory to Ferrari body. And that is being defined right up here. Real simple. So that when CarBase gets in there and says, okay, here's the new, let's just go back over to it. So here's the body factory. When I'm doing the actual build of the body, then when we add the body, where is it? There is it. See, I gotta find it now. Add body. When I actually add the body, I'm going to do a new body factory because CarBase does not know exactly what type of body to build, whether it's the base or one of the models. So that is why within, let's actually go back to Ferrari. That's why here, when I'm constructing the super here, I'm passing it my args, plus I'm passing it a new definition of body factory, saying, hey, for this particular car, use the Ferrari body. And the Ferrari body is very, very simple. Setting up the model itself and setting up the collider mesh, which is just a simple square. And then I'm setting up the physics imposter for the model and the physics imposter for the collider mesh itself. And that gives me all the different things I need to be able to take a look at each one of these cars. So now I've got it to the point where it's extraordinarily simple. 3 pieces to the car: wheels, transmission, and the body. And it's very easy to switch between the wheels and transmissions and the bodies, and to be able to build a collider mesh. Now, I do want to show you, let's go to the Ferrari and show you something about the collider mesh itself. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to turn on the collider mesh. I'm on the Ferrari? Yep. All right, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show, bounding box, that was the name of it. I kept saying earlier I couldn't remember the name of the outline there. It's called bounding box. I am going to turn on the collider mesh for the Ferrari, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. There's the collider mesh for the Ferrari. Now, if you really want to be technical about it, you're probably going to need an entire array of collider meshes. And the collider meshes can be either I've got it programmed here, it can either be a simple object, or it could be an array of objects. In this case, I just went with a very simple thing. But basically what will happen here, and you can see it as it's kind of moving forward there. That'd be a good one here. As you can tell, it will, once it hits the wall, there it goes, it hit the wall, it will stop. And that's the whole reason for the collider mesh. If I did not have the collider mesh there, it will keep on going until it got to the wheels. So the idea here is you want to build collider meshes for each of your models to be able to basically tell the physics engine, hey, with these models here, I want to be able to say, I'm going to stop at this point or stop at that point. Again, I did a very simple square here. In reality, you want to spend the time and get in a whole array of collider meshes to be able to match as close to the model as you can. So what I'm going to do here, just for funsies, why? I don't know, just for funsies, let's comment out that on the Ferrari and the collider meshes and show you how that looks. So there's the Ferrari, and now what we'll do is we'll kind of wait for it to start rolling forward. There we go, we're finally rolling forward. So let's take a look at what that front does to the wall. Yep, you can see it's clipping through it. Now the wheels and the transmission already have a collider mesh, so it should keep going until we get to the wheels. So we'll let it slide on through, but you can see how important collider meshes are. The collider meshes do not come with the models themselves, so we'll need to add that collider mesh in there to be able to get our collisions to work correctly, or else we're always going to have that little, in this case, this little thing stuck out at the top there. So that's basically it. I kind of wanted to show you the changes we made to the cars. I've made the cars a little bit simpler now than they were before, because before when I had them, it was just a holy mess, you know, when I first brought that new track in. So now the cars are a lot simpler. They work a whole heck of a lot better. And this will actually now complete the video on how we're working with the cars. If you like this video, please click on the like button below, subscribe to this channel, or leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. We're trying to reach 1 million subscribers by February of 2042, so please get cracking and subscribe to this channel. And again, thank you so very much for watching. This is the Virtuoid, aka Mike Smith. We'll see you later.